I don't know if she's coming back, but are we in compliance with the open meetings law?
Yes, we are in compliance.
Next or first, the only thing, however you want to say it on the agenda, is on the presentation of the proposed budget. So welcome to MATC's public hearing on the budget. Jeff Hollow, who's the Vice President of Finance, and Jenny Rothy, who's the Director of Facilities Planning, Sustainability, and Construction, will present the fiscal year 2023-24 budget to the public. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So today we're going to be talking about the operating capital equipment budgets. I will be talking about those, and Jenny will be talking about the capital infrastructure and remodeling budgets. And then at the end, we'll open up for questions if there are any. So on the first slide, you can see we have the reserves for what we're estimating for fiscal year 2023. We're projecting a balanced budget for 23-24, so there's going to be no change in the reserves. You can see the percent to revenue. There's higher revenue projected in year 2, so the reserves as a percent of revenue go down slightly. Next slide, please. So the changes that we're going to see in the 2 different years is the first year we project $173.8 million in revenue for the general fund, and the second year where we see an increase of 6.7 million of revenue. The increase is primarily we're estimating, and these are estimates. Estimating increase of, and we will find out in October from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue exactly what the change in some of these items will be. Like the tax levy, for instance, last year we had a $1.4 million increase in tax levy. This year we're projecting a $1.5 million increase in tax levy from net new construction. We did build a $5 million incremental state aid. We have since heard that that's quite a bit lower now, but we're working on adjusting our budget, but we did not have an opportunity to reduce our spending related to this. So we will continue to do that. And when we do our amendments in October, this will all be, we'll have it all cleaned up, but we did not have time to make changes. We have an increase in tuition revenue. We had 8,150 FTEs in fiscal year 23, and we're projecting 8,500 FTEs. And also it's partially offset by HERF funding. HERF funding is HERF is an acronym for Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds, and that was federally funded, and that expires, the funds we received expire as of June 30th, 2023. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of the major categories of the general fund revenues. You can see the local property tax, tuition and fees. You can see this, slight changes from year to year. And the federal, we had $1.2 million of HERF funds that we had for this year. That's the difference between in the federal line. So you can see the year-over-year changes in the major categories of revenue. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the state requires us to report by fund and by function. These are expenses by function. And the largest category of the general fund is instructional. You can see there's about an $8.4 million increase in expenses. It's primarily in that category. It's wages, benefits, supplies, anything that has to do with educational, instructional expenses are in that category. It is the largest change in spending. But if you look at the instructional category, that's about an 8.1% increase. And the next one down below it, it's a 0.7% increase. That's actually a 15.2% increase. And these are the categories, the major categories that were required. Each of the schools, the technical colleges in the state are required to report expenses by these categories. Next slide, please. Enterprise funds. These are considered Fund 5. And basically what we see on this slide is whether we expect them to have a surplus or a deficit. And you're looking at the description on the left of the enterprise accounts that we have. We have bookstore, childcare, food service, parking, and other. Other has to do with a lot of what we do is we have cuisine. We have a lot of couple cuisine locations on campus, and what they do is the students serve people from the outside, and the objective is to at least break even. You can see that that the cuisine number, parking other has gone down a little bit, but that's probably by the impact of the increase in cuisine operations in the upcoming projected year. You can see childcare. Typically, childcare is run at a deficit, and then food service is also showing a deficit in both years. And you can see the Fund 5 deficit as these are pre. We also have Milwaukee Public Television is also considered a Fund 5 entity, and you can see the reserves that we have for everything, all Fund 5 excluding public television. You can see that we're going to end fiscal year 24. We're projecting a $5.7 million surplus in reserves. So as we go down a little further, public television, since we have FCC funds, we balance the budget each year, so the reserves do not change from year to year. You can see there's and public television has $7.4 million of reserves. Next slide, please. This slide shows the total sources and uses of all funds. And you can see on the left-hand side, we have the sources. We have 402,747,741 sources of funds. And on the right-hand side, we have all the uses. And like I said, we categorize by function. We got, like you saw earlier, instruction and structural resources, etc. Going down. The one number at the bottom, the cost containment. Typically we have positions. Whenever positions are open, takes a period of time to fill those positions. The number is a little bit higher than the number that we had last year. We experienced 6 million. We also held some of those positions were held open. But we used 5 million this year, and that helped us to balance the budget in the general fund. Next slide, please. So this year we're going to MATC will borrow 18 million for construction and renovation projects, and 26 million for capital equipment finance purchases. We've experienced quite an increase in costs associated with capital. We're limited to the $1.5 million per month times 12 equals 18 for infrastructure. We are allowed to increase the capital equipment amount. And what we did is we adjusted that. It was 21 million the past couple of years, and we've increased the capital equipment to cover the necessary needs for funding technology and a lot of movable equipment for capital equipment. So that number is, we're asking for 26 million this year. So what we do is we have debt service payments, principal and interest, that's considered debt service. In 23-24, the total will be roughly $7 million of debt service for the year. 3.5 of this will be allocated for debt service for Milwaukee Public Television. So the total principal for this debt service will be paying down $39.4 million, and the interest is $2.8 million for the total of the breakdown of the total debt service. Next slide, please. So this is an illustration of the last 5 years that we've experienced, and also a projection of the upcoming fiscal year. The mill rate and the tax, the MATC tax on $100,000 home. You can see back in 2019, the tax on $100,000 home was $122.56. In 2023, the actual was $89.98, and we're projecting the same for 2024. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of our capital equipment purchases that we are projecting for the upcoming fiscal year budget. And the categories, the academics category is almost $10 million of equipment. In IT, information technology, $6.2 million. Construction services, you can see it. And public television is about $3.4 million. And the total, as I mentioned earlier, is $26 million. And next slide, please. And now Ginny Rothi is going to take us through the capital infrastructure and remodeling budget.
You can go ahead to the next slide. So in the slides that I go through, we'll be looking at some of the project highlights from the current fiscal year, as well as a preview of the recommended projects for the next fiscal year. So our construction and renovation project budget for next fiscal year. So as Jeff mentioned, we will be borrowing 18 million in construction costs. So that breaks out into these categories. We do have a series of instructional facilities improvements that we will be putting forward. And I do have a few slides that will talk through some of the details on that, but you can see a snapshot of what those include. We also have some large investments continuing in life safety security for our campuses, fire panel mass notification, access control, and sprinklering our buildings. And then we are continuing to chip away at deferred maintenance in our aging buildings and improving our infrastructure. Next slide. So for fiscal year 24, our focus continues to be on supporting the strategic planning and proposed renovations that really have bubbled through the academic multi-year plan that the board approved last year, and the facilities multi-year plan as well. So we are connecting those strategic priorities in this budget. We are also continuing to invest in our public spaces that need to be renovated, updated, made accessible and safe. And we are continuing to invest in connecting connected and hybrid classrooms, and investing in technology to connect our students online. We are, again, improving our building infrastructure and finding ways to find cost-saving measures through sustainability projects. Next. So as a reminder, how we select the budget for the next fiscal year, we go through a process of ranking and evaluating each of the requests that are put forward and the needs that are identified through our strategic plans. And this is a snapshot of our prioritization matrix and some of the criteria that we evaluate projects through. So in addition to those strategic alignments that we've gone over, we do look for risk and code compliance in prioritizing projects. We look for impact to industry and the academic experience. We look at the existing conditions for what's being requested, for cost savings and revenue potential in our projects. So this year we did have a list. It is ongoing from year to year, but it is up to 104 million in requests that we have on a list for not only academic areas, but highly visible common spaces, and on for infrastructure requests. So we're at 104 million in requests received. So after our prioritization of projects, our goal, as we mentioned, is to get to a budget for this next fiscal year of 18 million. Next. So our proposed capital construction budget for this 18 million is broken out as you see here, and we will get into the details of it. We do have it categorized again as the state likes to see us classify our areas of construction. So instructional spaces, highly visible common spaces, facilities infrastructure, and then we have core construction costs, which includes salaries for the construction team, for funding our architect engineers, and contingency costs. Next. So for the instructional spaces that are in the budget, we have 6.9 million in the budget for academic and instructional spaces. So we do each year a bucket of funding for updating our general classroom spaces. So that's the 725,000 in the budget. So this will be a variety of some of our oldest classrooms that are in need of updates and improvements. We also have a large project, 1.5 million, to do a centralized tutoring emporium at the downtown Milwaukee campus. So that will be in the main building. It will bring together all of our academic support areas and some of our niche academic support tutoring areas into one centralized space. We will be moving the welding lab from the West Dallas campus to the Walker Square campus this year. So that is in the budget, 1.45 million, in anticipation of closing down the A building at the West campus, which is at very much end of life. The Barber Cosmetology Lab in the main building first floor. We will be relocating and renovating a portion of those Barber Cosmetology labs on the first floor. The C Auditorium, which is built in the 1960s, we'll see an update this next year for 1 million in the budget. This is supported by our music programs. Milwaukee PBS also is using the C Auditorium for broadcasting as well. The electricity lab is in need of an expansion to accommodate increasing waiting lists in that program. So we will be expanding that program in the T building. That's on the budget for 800,000. And then Mequon will be seeing an expansion of the respiratory therapy program. It is downtown currently. It will continue downtown and also expand to the Mequon campus. Next. For highly visible and accessibility construction, we have a budget of 3.7 million tied to that. We do every year chip away at updating our restrooms in the district too. So we will continue that work this year. We have in the budget 900,000 for that work. The projects this year will be on the third floor of the C building, updating all of the men's and women's rooms and adding gender neutral restrooms on that floor as well. We will be doing minor remodels throughout the district, $260,000. So these are the remodels that tend to fall under at least 100,000, typically under 25 for each of those remodels for carpet refreshes and smaller upgrades throughout the district. We will be doing 350,000 in office improvements in the district as well. So these are various varied student support areas, faculty offices, etc. We will be in the budget doing 1.35 million to be building a multicultural student center. We're targeting the foundation hall second floor for this work. This year we were straightening the connector bridge between the S building and the C building, and we will be building this multicultural student center along those highly visible spaces. And we also have in the budget 840,000 to be updating our event and conference meeting spaces on the 6th floor of the main building. Next. So for facilities, infrastructure, and core construction costs, we do have 7.4 million in the budget. These include emergency costs that come up throughout the year for unplanned events that happens to our buildings that need to be addressed. We also include scope development, so getting through conceptual planning and sometimes into design development on projects for the next fiscal year that can be ready to construct when the next fiscal year comes along. And as I mentioned, contingency funding and salary funding is in that $2.05 million budget. We every year continue to update our HVAC, our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning budget and electrical updates throughout the district. We do have buildings that range in age from 1890 through our newest wing of our building was at the Oak Creek campus, the ECAM building built in the early 2000s. So we do have aging buildings and are working to keep those modernized and updated for the systems within them. As I mentioned, we do have life safety projects we continue to invest in. So 2.5 million this year will be working mainly on starting to sprinkler the remaining buildings in the district that are not sprinklered. So main building will be targeted for next year for starting that project, continuing to do access control throughout our district, and updating our fire and mass notification systems. We do have 1.35 million in the budget too, to continue on roof replacements, stormwater drainage projects, and parking improvements throughout the district. Next. And then these are just some updates on current fiscal year projects that the board approved last year. So just to give some updates on concepts and construction that's underway. This is a glimpse at the STEM Center downtown that's currently under construction to be completed for the fall semester. So this is in the C building, second floor. So this will be a project used to connect K-12 with our STEM pathway and to service our students in tutoring and class support spaces. Next. This is a picture of a project that we're opening the bids on this Thursday. It will be on the board meeting agenda for next week. Those bids will. This is for the student rec and lounge spaces on the 3rd floor of the S building, the student center. So this is a glimpse at the new gaming and lounging area for students downtown. Next.
It's a big upgrade. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And then here's an actual picture of the new kitchen and cafeteria in the student center. This was completed this past year. If you haven't been up there, here is a glimpse at that great new space for students and the cafeteria that we have at the downtown campus. And I believe that's the end. So yeah, if there are any questions on any of the materials that Jeff and I went over.
I just have one question about just clarification. I don't recall this, but what's instructional resources? It's under the general fund expenditure. What is this?
Instructional resources. Okay, so instructional resources are primarily, I'm taking from the WTCS has a listing of how we classify these. It's the biggest one of the categories is library learning resource center, includes all activities related to the library functions, audio video services, instructional data processing, distance learning support, other instructional resources, and instructional resources administration. So those are the 6 categories under instructional resources.
Jeff, I had a question around Fund 5. Can you go back to that slide by chance? I think it was like slide 9. I just want to make sure I'm understanding, because I thought I had heard you say surplus, but I think it means deficit when we're going through that. So right now, because we will have a larger deficit next year, we'll actually be pulling from reserves to get that, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I'm
So when
sorry.
you look at the fund balance or the reserve balance in Fund 5 as compared to other funds, do we have benchmarks or percentages that we try to maintain those at? Is that falling below that? Is that okay? Because I mean, we've talked about these funds for a number of years here and how they continue to run in the deficit, and eventually, like, what will be the plan when there isn't a fund balance to come and replenish that when we're running in the deficit? I guess that's my question.
Good question. We were able to, with our HERF funds, we were able to build up the reserves here, because knowing that look at it, see the bookstore typically runs a surplus. And what we're trying to do is we're going to reduce the costs for students. So the bookstore will not have, for in future years, as we start to go to the
Open source.
yeah. So we'll go to open source, and then once we do that, there's very little profit. So that
Right.
would be one of the resources that will be taken away. So
Right.
we knowing that was one of that was one of our objectives in long term.
Mhm.
We did build up the reserves in the using HERF funds, and we had, we followed the procedures and built up those reserves in Fund 5. And food service, I'm a little surprised. Food service,
Right.
we anticipated once we got the food service in place that food service was going to start to break even. And as you can see, they're still projecting a loss
Right.
next year. Parking, obviously, it's a net increase in revenue. That's one of our, it's a structure that we have out here. And we have, it's all net income. And then the other part of other was like I said, the culinary areas where the students run it, and they basically try to break even.
Right.
They just cover their costs. So it is a concern in the long run, definitely. Fund 5, because the definition of a Fund 5 account is to operate it. The attempt is to at
Correct.
least break even.
Right.
And childcare is the one area that
Yep.
we've known for years, is we've had to support that area. And
Right.
So
Well, and
we're-
we've had this conversation on the board for many, many years, and then
Right.
we had COVID, and so then there was a lot of things going on, and I know that we use those HERF funds, but I guess I do think it's probably something as we continue, because that open source, if you're using that bookstore to sort of backfill, childcare and food service, and that revenue stream goes away, if you will.
Right.
I think we had in-depth conversations around that childcare piece and just balancing that out, and then food service too. That seems like you should be able to at least break even with
Right.
that. So I guess I think it's just, I get it right now, and like for this year, like, you're talking about an increase, but long term, there seems to be some strategies that need to be considered, because you can't keep running a deficit. I
Right.
mean, the goal for anything is to run balanced.
So you think about the risks associated with food service and childcare. A lot of technical colleges have gone to outsourcing the food service and childcare. And we've been trying to avoid that.
Yep.
But if we, to the extent that we need to go in that direction, that might be something that will be happening. As we mentioned, bookstore goes to OER, open educational resources, as we talked about. Those surpluses will be next to nothing in the
Right.
future.
Yep, Director Baker.
So I can remember some on this topic, because my question was also on these funds. So in the past, we used to have a bigger deficit in childcare. And we started exploring how much of childcare would actually be considered instructional or aidable costs. And we could move them out of Fund 5 into our general fund. And I'm wondering from
We
your
are,
description of the food service, if it's our culinary students doing that and it's instructional lab work, can we be moving some of this deficit out into our aidable into our general fund.
We have, so I think if I remember correctly, the amount that was moved out of childcare for the upcoming budget is $345,000. So that would have been
Yeah, got it.
another hit to that childcare.
Wait, so my question was really so on food service, because your
Food service.
descriptors were, you know,
I
that
can-
our students use it as a learning lab, and I think that was the bell that went off for us in childcare years ago. That
Yes,
might be a way to help at least take some of the pressure off in
yeah,
that fund.
so they could work in the food service and then they could get instruction and they could prepare, they can do a lot of the food prep and a lot of the work that.
Yeah.
You know, that, yes, those are options. We have to get the academic group and the food service people to coordinate that effort.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting replacing, I'm sorry,
No,
and
no.
I might have misheard. I thought you had said that part of this was our students. The work, part of the costs in food service
Oh,
was our students.
No, if you look
Yeah,
at, okay,
yeah.
so if you look at down, okay, see, Fund 5 net, or parking other.
Yeah,
So you can see, it looks like if we look at the 2024, some of those, when we say other, some of those are some of the cuisine areas.
okay,
They have we operate
Yeah.
like a culinary arts, the culinary food service, and they have like on the 6th floor.
been there.
They also, yeah, so I mean, the food, when they serve the food is incredible. But if they're breaking even, so it's, you know, that's what, and the students are providing that, but it does make good sense to bring these areas together with the cafeteria to stem some of those losses possibly. But right now they're working separate.
Gotcha. I understand. Thank you.
My question is a slide after total resources and uses of all funds.
Okay,
So the total of resource funds that we receive versus used funds,
yes,
where does the rest of those funds go?
the difference between the
Yeah.
two. Well, some of them, okay, so do you have to look at each one individually? What they do is, so the difference between those funds are, sometimes you have, I'd have to look at each one in separately to answer that question, but the difference, you know, we were probably talking about the 15, 16, 17,
Mhm.
17.5 million dollars.
Yeah,
That just assumes that we're going to, some of the sources, I believe, are from inventory that we would have from, or unspent funds from the previous year. So we have, so they would be a source. So it's not really cash flow, so to speak.
okay.
It's not, we're not building reserves, if you're wondering if that's the question, we're not, that's.
I just wanted to know, like, obviously,
It's a
we
good
keep
question.
speaking of deficits in this area.
This is all funds.
Okay,
Okay,
but yeah, so when I seen the difference between what we actually bring in versus what we actually are using, I was trying to see like.
okay, so what I'll do is I'll get the answer for that for next Tuesday. And we'll talk about the difference, that $17.5 million
Okay.
between the sources and uses.
Okay,
And
that'll be
off the
helpful
top
for
of my
me.
head, I wouldn't have the answer for that.
And then I think the other one is slide 11. I marked it, but I'm not exactly sure. The capital equipment budget area. I just wanted to know what enter and stay was.
Enter and stay, that's typical. Okay, so enter and stay, that does, it's.
Is that the
formally
right slide? I don't think. Yes. Okay.
you want to know what that is?
Yeah, I just didn't know what it
So
was.
it used to be called, before we went to guided pathways, that was called student that was part of student services. Now
Okay.
we break it into how we, students come on
So
to the.
retention?
What stay is retention,
So it's like attraction and retention?
yes.
Okay.
So they're
Right, so if
broken
there
up
is
into
like
different
financial
categories.
aid, it would
So it's
be
bringing students in and then
admissions,
keeping them here.
registration.
Enter and
Yep.
stay?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, I just,
It used to be.
it just
one
said
large
enter
category,
and stay, so
student
I'm like.
services. Yeah, previously known as student services years ago.
Yeah, that was it.
Are there any other questions from board members?
Oh, no, I didn't have one. On, I think it's slide 4, there was a projected $5 million. But you said it's like much lower. What is it now?
Oh, plan cost savings.
No, state funding.
Oh,
Yep.
that it was 5, we projected 5 million because that's what WTCS told us. And it's us, it's about only $500,000. So we're looking for $4.5 million in savings. So in our revenue, we had $5 million of incremental state aid.
Mhm.
And we believe that the legislature is going to pass 500,000 as opposed to 5 million.
Okay,
So we're looking for 4.5 million in savings.
okay. That was all. for me.
Okay, anybody else? So since this is a public hearing, the board will listen to any comments from the public, but will not respond to any of those comments. Is there anybody who would like to comment on the proposed budget? In the audience, or we don't have anybody on there, right? It would have to be somebody here physically, Beth, is what she said. Because those should only be board members and employees on there.
No, it's not virtual.
No. That's when we had made that decision last meeting that we would do in person. Yep. I'm not seeing anybody jumping up or raising their hands, so if not, then can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Adjournment.
3 seconds.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I will see you all a week from today.
Thank you, everyone.
So Lisa, so you put a reference.